Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to episode 9, number 9 of Hocus Focus with me, Thomas Sheridan.
And me, Sara Mondaini.
And we're delighted that you're back and still coming back in the big numbers and everything. And thank you for all your fantastic comments, your great support, and great feedback, especially. Really, both Sara and I are taken back by the wonderful nature of the comments and how positive and encouraging they are. And so I'm delighted, and I'm sure I'll speak for Sara when I say this, to have you here as part of the conversation as our Sunday night dive into high strangeness.
Totally echo what you've said. Those comments are fantastic, and there's some brilliant ideas in there, and we are going through them for future episodes. So keep them coming, keep your thoughts coming. We really appreciate them, and it's nice to have you back for episode 9.
And tonight we have all the usual suspects that you've come to expect from Hocus Focus. And at the very end, we'll have an extra special treat. So we're always developing the show. And we have a really cool movie for you tonight. And, well, let's get on with the first topic. Tonight's first topic is a very interesting one. I first heard of this device when I lived on Long Island in New York. And someone told me that there was a village that had a wire that went all the way around it. And it was an Orthodox Jewish village. And later on, I found out, to my amazement, that this wire also surrounded the borough or the island of Manhattan in New York. And it's called an Eruv or Eruv or something like that. It's hard to pronounce, a Yiddish word or a Hebrew word. And it's basically an extension of the magic circle when you think about it. You've heard both myself and Sara talking about the nature of the sacred space. And the purpose of this wire that goes around these Jewish neighborhoods is so customs associated with the Sabbath, such as not bringing things from one place to another, visiting people, being seen by other people outside your own home, can be turned into a giant home. So you can do these things because essentially once you're inside the wire, you're basically allowed to do things that you normally wouldn't be allowed to do outside your home on the Sabbath. Now, the one in Manhattan fascinated me because it literally does go around the entire island of Manhattan, and they pay a guy to inspect it before every Sabbath, and crews fix the wire. Now, it may seem superstitious to people, it may seem strange, and it is in its own way, but it also is very akin to the magic circle within ritual magic. The idea that within the circle is a different reality than outside the circle, and then certain things that would be normally unavailable outside the circle are available inside the circle, and vice versa. And there's 160 or something of these things all over the world, including large numbers in Israel, well, not surprisingly. But I find the whole thing of the copper wire fascinating. Now, it's contentious that some Orthodox Jewish communities think it's a bit of a sellout, a bit of an excuse to break the rules of the Sabbath. But it's a fascinating topic, and the fact that it costs a lot of money every year to actually fix this wire. And they raise money through wealthy Jewish foundations to actually pay for it. It originally was only in the lower east side of Manhattan, but it now extends around the whole island. And the funny thing is, it kind of fell out of favor for a while, and it fell into neglect. But in the last 20 years or so, the repair to the Eruv was actually, become a big deal again. But aside from the fact of the religious, overtones to it, whatever, it does speak volumes about the concept of the sacred space inside a certain area. What do you think about this, Sara?
When I first learned of it, I wondered if it was just simply a superstitious way of getting out of a religious ritual. And then when I looked into it a bit deeper, I saw there's actually quite a bit more of an occult angle to it, especially with the circle. And that wire is an enormous magic circle for protection from Yahweh, which allows them to perform the ritual while still appeasing him so that they don't make him angry, because as we've said before, if they make him angry, they believe that he will destroy the world.
Yes, that's a very The point you brought up, there are several Orthodox Jewish sects that actually believe, interestingly and kind of honestly, that Yahweh is as wicked as he is kind. And they believe that if you have to constantly appease Yahweh with sacrifice and prayer and adoration, it'll stop him from destroying the world. Which I find that fascinating idea, because it ties in a lot with what later Christian sects like the Bogomils and the Cathars and even the Gnostics believe that this god Yahweh, the Demiurge, was actually an evil demon. And it's almost like these Orthodox Jewish sects have actually figured this out, and this is the way of they actually have to keep this thing at bay by protecting themselves from it.
And just like in a magic ritual, the rules that are imposed upon that wire or protective circle are really precise. So every Thursday night before dawn, a rabbi has to drive around the perimeter to ensure that there's no breakage and no damage within the wire. And the care taken, it's no different to people with knowledge of how to summon, who do rituals of how to summon demons. They know that they have to create a protective circle and they can't leave it and they can't break it during the ritual. Otherwise, the demon being summoned or appeased could likely destroy them. So
there's a fear.
This magic circle.
There's a fear of their god, a real, genuine fear. You know, and it's almost like this is a force field to protect them from seeing their indiscretions.
Yeah, and if there's a slight break due to the weather or any construction work within that perimeter of that wire, that circle, then they can't use it as a protection. They can't go out. They can't carry. You can't carry keys. You can't push. You can't pull. You can't push a stroller. You can't pick up your child. You can't do anything. And they find lots of different ways around it. So, for example, on the Sabbath, they can't go out carrying keys. So a lot of the Orthodox Jewish people have found a way around it where they'll sew the keys into their jacket, so they're not carrying it, they're wearing them and things like this. That's how seriously they take it. It really is something else. And the fear they have if they break that Sabbath, if they break the rules, then they really, well, it's not an option. It's just not an option for them.
I tried to find out why they use copper rather than any other metal, and the reason is it doesn't corrode. That's all. But any metal can be used, not just copper, but copper is handy because it doesn't corrode to the same level as steel. Now, this got me thinking about like kind of extrapolating this on, and I don't mean any disrespect to people. I'm not making light of things. But when you think about the Holocaust and the Jewish people were locked up, many of these Orthodox communities were actually locked up in concentration camps that had the near view around it, actually built by the SS and whatever. There's a kind of a painful irony in that, I think, as well, is that ironically, while they were in the camp, they could have done these things on the Sabbath because of the wire around the camp. And I find that, like, you know, I don't mean to make little light of anything like that, but it is fascinating stuff, this whole thing. And I looked around to see if there was other communities that had similar things, and there really isn't. Like, not that I could find. Doesn't exist in Islam or Christianity or any other sect. So it's definitely unique to the Orthodox Jewish. It doesn't even exist in liberal Jews and Reformed Jewish communities. Only in certain Orthodox sects. And even those are, or there's even within them, there are ones that say this is a cop-out. This is actually a way, like what you said at the beginning. But it's a very, very interesting thing, and it's fascinating, really. I mean, it's one of those things that shows there isn't a big difference between magic sometimes and religion.
Well, a magic circle or a protection space acts as a portal to other realms, or protection from evil forces, or even just a psychological tool to put you in the right state of mind for doing the work that you're going to do. And it preserves the integrity of what's inside the circle and helps keep it protected from any harm that might be coming towards it from outside the circle. So if they have a very vengeful god and they're seen to be breaking his rules, then they don't want to take a chance, and they feel protected with inside that circle, that he can't touch them, he can't do any harm to them, and they're not disrespecting him. It's all it's very, very, very interesting.
It's a spooky as well in its own kind of way.
I was just going to say, circles are sacred. They're very sacred, and they're also paradoxical, because they bring you together, and then they can also divide you as well, depending where you are on the circle. And it's got a really interesting dualism to it, dividing and separating, and they're used in so many rituals across all the major spiritual traditions in the world. It's just quite an interesting geometrical shape.
Yeah, it's the concept of the sanctuary, of the special secluded place that's of its own reality. That to me has always been a fascinating thing, and I think that Eruv is an example of that.
I know that the Christians refer to the circle as being symbolic of the love of God, because it's never ending. It's a never ending shape, so there's no beginning and there's no end. And it's infinite movement, and it represents the universe, really, and the earth, the change of the seasons and all the rhythmical cycles of life.
Yeah.
Everything moves in a circle-like manner within the universe, galaxies, stars and planets, and everything's cyclical. So it is the concept of a magic circle, to choose a circle and it not be a magic square or a magic triangle. It does make sense. It is a very sacred shape.
Yeah, definitely. So that's the Eruv. That's we also cover strange Fortean things in the mainstream religions too, although that's not quite mainstream. But next time you're in Manhattan, remind yourself that you're inside a sacred space from Friday sundown on Friday evening to sunrise on Saturday morning.
We have one near here.
Is there? Yeah, I know Manchester's got a big.
Yeah, we've got one in Prestwich. Yeah.
Yeah. And do the locals know about it?
Well, I didn't know about it. I wouldn't say, unless you're an Orthodox Jewish faith, I don't think you're going to know what it is unless you asked. You just assume it was telegraph wires or something.
Yeah. That's I first became aware of it in a small town as well. But to actually go to the level to cover in Manhattan Island, that's a colossal. It's actually a colossal piece of infrastructure when you think about it. But this is what some people do for their god. Okay, that's the Eruv. In this week's Folk Horror Cinema, we review, talk about, and discuss John Carpenter's 1987 movie Prince of Darkness. The film takes place in a urban neighborhood somewhere in the United States, and the name Prince of Darkness kind of lets the film down because it's far more complex and interesting than just something about the devil. Essentially, Donald Pleasance, who's perfectly cast as a Catholic priest, does something about him that just screams that for some reason. Recruits a theoretical physicist and a bunch of a PhD level students from a nearby university to basically examine this container, which is in the basement of this rundown Catholic church that has a green spiral liquid in it. Donald Pleasant doesn't really tell the rest of the people what it's about, the students and the professor, but they just think it's a really kooky experiment that they're under. Now, what makes it interesting, it's in a poor neighborhood. Outside, there are homeless people who start Renfielding, and for want of a better word, and one of them is none other than Alice Cooper. And they start acting very strangely. Bugs start coming out of them. They act very peculiar. They swarm around the church as if they're protecting it. And eventually they start doing horrid things. While inside the church itself, the scientists figure out that this liquid is basically an unknown subatomic structure of some kind. It's in a vessel that millions of years old they've done from the carbon dating, and they also have a woman there who does deciphering of ancient manuscripts. As the film progresses and as this fluid starts to possess people in a kind of a consciousness way, we discovered that the actual subatomic fluid inside the container is something akin to the ultimate evil. It's basically like Melkor in Lord of the Rings that gave us Sauron. It had created Satan. It's the father of Satan, basically, and the father of all wickedness on this earth, the Prince of Darkness. And it's trying to get back into this earth. And what makes the film really interesting, apart from the sort of like the quantum theory end of it and the fantastic, droning synthesizers you get in John Carpenter films, is at one point they all start having the same dream, and it turns out that the dreams are using tracheons, which are subatomic particles that move faster than the speed of light. And someone in the future has sent them back a dream, a collective dream of what's happening and what this liquid is all about. And then they basically are trying to find a way about to destroy it before it takes over the world. It has parallels with things like the AIDS virus at the time, because it was 87. Chernobyl, one time they talked about putting a concrete sarcophagus over the church to protect the earth from it. And there's an overwhelming ickiness regarding insects and so on, and bugs and stuff like this. The film is very, very good. It's very deep. It runs on a lot of levels. Like a lot of John Carpenter films, it's far deeper than the average Hollywood marketing pitch for it. And I think like a lot of people at the time would have said, that's okay, but like everything else he's done has a cult following. He gave himself the writing name of, I think, Martin Quatermass as his salute to Nigel Neal's films and the Quatermass films. So it's very much, if you like those films, it's an American version of that. But The Prince of Darkness it's just excellent. It's just a really good film. It's gory, it's creepy, it's disturbing. It plays on everything to do with consciousness, nightmare, the subatomic world, theoretical physics, and Donald Pleasant quoting Latin with an axe in his hand is the most kick-ass thing you could probably see ever in a film. So yeah, I really liked it. What about you, Sarah?
I found it very dark, very creepy. It's an apocalyptic movie. It's like an end of days movie almost, and it starts with great suspense and it builds up, and there's lots going on in them first opening scenes. There's the death of a priest, there's auguries left, right and centre in the sky and on the ground, discovery of a supernova, and things that we probably wouldn't even notice so much nowadays because most people have got their heads down on the phone screens. And even the way those people behaved outside the church, those homeless people, would seem like normal behaviour nowadays, where they were walking around and Renfielding. But these academic students go off to spend a weekend with the tutor to study this substance that's been hidden in this old monastery or church. And in between them being told that they're going and them arriving, there's just increasing visuals of things going on out on the street that tell you there's something not quite right with the world. And then we discover that the church has been hiding a secret and keeping this secret, which I won't say what this secret is, but they've been keeping this secret until man could discover a science that was sophisticated enough to understand what the nature of the universe and good and evil was all about. And it brings horror and science and theology all into one film, which I thought was quite bold. And it brings up the question of what would happen if science could explain what God and the anti-God was and where they lived and resided. And I think for me, I also found that substance, that green substance, was quite symbolic of what's in the needlecraft today, maybe, and why they were so determined to get that into everybody today. You could relate it back to AIDS back in 1987, but if you watch it from this perspective, it screams needlecraft to me. And actually it took me a while to realise that one of the Renfields outside who resembled Alice Cooper actually was Alice Cooper. I just thought it was a lookalike. A little bit too dark for me. And I just found the apocalyptic end of days horror just to be a bit too heavy for me at the moment. But having said that, it is a good film and seriously worth a watch.
It's
Yes.
definitely aged well from 87. It doesn't look, like I said, the fluid could be the needlecraft fluid. There's also, I forgot about the astrological alignments in the sky. That was like very Lovecraftian when the stars have come right again. And yeah, and the way they infect one another, that was kind of like the thing. They were trying to get the fluid into them at any cost. That fluid has to be put into you at any cost. One other thing I really, really liked was the way that they played on the concept of the mirror. The mirror being, the glass mirror being more than just something that reflects our world, but is actually a doorway, is the wickedness trying to get into this world. And I kept thinking about the phones and the scrying screens on the phones and the digital djinn and trying to get into this world, this that a lot of that kind of stuff. So it's one that's my I love films where the allegories are applicable in a new way decades later. And that's what I really know. It is a dark film. It's definitely not uplifting, but at the same time too, they still, well, there's an element of sacrifice in it too as well in order to win. But I thought that the film was the way the mirror was brought into the story. I thought that was really intriguing and interesting. And again, it's classic John Carpenter. It's it's like harmless America turned upside down. There's elements of Lovecraft, Nigel Neal, everything you want really, and very well written and very well. You could tell that when he wrote that script, he was like he just discovered about quantum theory and stuff like that, and was fascinated by it and brought it into the story. And then the concept of coupling that with horror. Well, isn't that where we live today now, isn't it? The whole thing with the digital djinn and everything. But yeah, Prince of Darkness, I thought it was a very good film. Yeah, it is dark. Prepare yourself for it. It's not like family viewing or anything. But again, if you like me and you like the kind of films that tell the stories of now in allegories that are very contemporary, shifting, moving, it's definitely that kind of a film.
Even though it's quite what's the word, telling of what we're going through now, I don't think it was meant to be. I don't think he did it. He wrote it having some kind of secret knowledge or anything like that. I think it was more like, when you do cut-ups and you put things together, and then when you look back on them years later, you think, oh, that's exactly what's happening now. It was almost like a cut-up, like he'd wrote that film and it was made of cut-ups.
Well,
it was accidental.
Science fiction and cosmic horror writers tend to have that as a gift. They tend to have that. They tend to see, especially the way he wrote that film script, you could tell he was in a deep state of concentration. They tend to be able to channel, ironically, the future back in the same way that in the story in the movie, the Trachons bring the future back into our time and dreams. The more I'm talking about this film, Prince of Darkness, there's more increasing levels of sophistication in it. That it's getting deeper and deeper, and it really is. It's definitely one of those movies that has like multiple layers going on it, and lots of things you can apply it to. It's the name Prince of Darkness makes you think of as a dumb Satan film or something, but it's way more than that. In many ways, it could have been a warning of we could have channeled what the future was like, and with the needlecraft and technology, because it was a form of technology that was using the subatomic world to change consciousness. The next topic 2, deals with a story that's long fascinated me regarding the Cottingley Fairies. It's a true story of 2 young girls in the north of England who came across fairies, and it became a massive story in its day, and Sara will talk us through it.
In July 1917, Elsie Wright and her young cousin Frances Griffith photographed fairies in the garden in the village of Cottingley in Yorkshire. The Cottingley fairies became the focus of attention between men of science and those who wished to retreat into the fairy realm. The girls had been playing by the stream at the back of the house in the back garden, and the younger one, Frances, had gotten soaking wet. So her mother wanted to know why she was always down by the stream, despite being told off time after time not to come in wet through. So Frances told her mother that she went there to see the fairies, and the adults laughed. And the older girl, Elsie, said it was actually true and that they'd prove it by taking photographs. So Elsie's father let them use his camera and his developing room, and they took photographs of the fairies and they developed them in the home studio. Now, Elsie's mother, Polly, took these photographs to her local Theosophy Society in Harrogate, and there they caught the attention of Edward Gardner. Now, these photos were studied by experts, including technicians at Kodak, who said that the photographs seemed genuine, and they got the attention of many people, including the writer and spiritualist Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Now, he was writing for the Strand magazine at the time, and he wanted to include the photographs in an article about fairies. Now, Conan Doyle, as you know, was famous for Sherlock Holmes, but he also wrote non-fiction spiritualist works, and his most famous one was The Coming of the Fairies in 1922. And he described his beliefs about the nature and existence of fairies and spirits, and reproduced the 5 Cottingley fairy photographs for his book. And he was adamant that anyone who suspected them as being faked were wrong, and expressed his deep conviction that they were all authentic. Now, there were 5 photographs, and eventually the girls admitted that 4 of the fairy photographs were faked with paper cutouts and hat pins to hold them up. But the 5th photo was a real photograph of fairies. And in that 5th photograph, the fairies looked different. They were more ethereal and wispy, whereas in the other photos, the fairies did look more like the paper cutouts. Now, even though the 4 fairy photos were a hoax, the girls maintained that they were actually surrounded by fairies, and Elsie and Frances said that they felt sad for adults who couldn't see the magic in the forests around them, and if only they could see what they saw. Now, the photos were taken to the Antiques Roadshow in 2009 by Frances's daughter, and she maintains that her mother did see fairies and that the 5th photo was a genuine photo of fairies. And even the antique expert at the Antiques Roadshow was inclined to believe it to be true. But most people have written off the entire set of photos as a hoax. And even Frances said she was deeply ashamed of the deceit and she wasn't expecting so much attention, as they were meant for the family consumption only. There's definitely something different about that 5th photo, and I'm open to the idea that the girls may have been surrounded by fairies and caught something in that last photo. Now, concerning the other 4 photos, I believe they wanted to share with others the magic that they'd been privy to, and so they innocently created the photographs to describe what they saw or to even make sense of what they saw. And Conan Doyle was a spiritualist, and he believed lots of supernatural phenomena that were eventually shown to be hoaxes, such as spirit materialization from 2 psychics who were later exposed as frauds. And he also believed that 2 stage magicians called Julius and Agnes Zanzig had genuine psychic powers, and he claimed publicly that the Zanzigs used telepathy. But eventually the Zanzigs confessed that their mind-reading act had been a trick, and they published all the details and all the secrets of how it was done to a London newspaper. And Doyle even had a run-in with Harry Price, the psychic investigator who attended Borley Rectory for investigations. Now, Harry Price had accused a spirit photographer called William Hope as being a fraud, and Doyle had threatened to have him removed from the National Laboratory of Psychic Research if he carried on trying to rubbish the spiritualists. And Doyle even got 84 members of the society to resign in protest on the grounds that they believed that the society was opposed to spiritualism. Was he being set up on purpose, or did he just want to believe? From 1887, he was a Freemason at the Phoenix Lodge in Southsea. but he resigned in 1889, and then he went back to it again in 1902, and then resigned again in 1911. Did Conan Doyle know the fifth fairy photo was authentic, and he too wanted people to believe in the existence of the nature spirits? Can fairies even be photographed? The nature spirits, is it even possible to capture them on a camera? Were the fairies visible to the girls due to their age and innocence, making them more open to see the unseen? It's a mystery to me. What do you think about it?
Well, it's a story that there's a strong psychological element to it. Conan Doyle had lost his son in World War One, and this is one of the things that drove him for research into the paranormal and the Fortean. He may have had an almost fatherly like or grandfatherly like relationship with those girls, and he sort of compensated for his son who died didn't give him grandchildren. So the two girls, Elsie and Frances, who had recently returned from, had only moved back from South Africa to Yorkshire, were probably that in some way to him. Now, even as a kid, I saw those photographs and I knew they were obviously fakes. They're obviously pictures from fairy tale books or something, and then the books were even produced in their time. And yet Conan Doyle maintained to the end they were telling the truth. And the two girls didn't confess until they were practically on their deathbed. And the story was that the fifth photograph, which is very, very peculiar, was the real thing. And I tend to believe that. The photographs themselves, the composition, and the look of the way the fairies are laid out, those girls had serious artistic talent. They were beautifully composed photographs. They looked wonderful, and the girls were very photogenic. So they were perfect for something like a Strand magazine. And there was also, people forget, there was between like 1900 or late 1800s and the 1920s, there was a huge interest in fairies. You know, you had people like William Butler Yeats writing books about it, and Evan Wentz and Lady Gregory, and all these other people were taking the concept Lady Wilde of fairies very, very seriously. It was a big deal. It was not considered like that far out there. And this was Conan Doyle's belief that there were other realms. Yeah, okay. And the pictures of the Cottingley fairies proved this. But I think the fact that he actually, I think what made him, and Gardner, who went down there and had the photographs, Edward Gardner had the pictures, you know, Eastman Kodak Laboratories examined the plates and the negatives and said they were legit photographs. They were not, you know, composites or anything like that, or double exposures. So, and he was a firm believer in the fairy story, even after people would use books showing that there was these cutouts where they actually came from, these storybooks that were printed. But my theory would be that the girls definitely saw fairies. Put them in their place. Two girls from South Africa land in the enchanted dales of Yorkshire, right? There's a stream outside their house, a fairy stream, in the sort of like picturesque village. They would have been sort of enchanted into kind of a fairy consciousness anyway. They probably did see the fairies, because fairies are generally, it's quite common for fairies to be interested in foreigners, you know that? Like someone who's not from the area. In Ireland, a lot of fairies stories revolve around English women who lived here, especially if they got pregnant, foreign women. And they were more likely to see fairies than the locals, or fairies are to appear to them. But the fairies are very interested in anyone who's different. They take an interest in outsiders. The two South African girls were there, so that was already one thing, in a place known for fairies. And I believe that maybe, you know, what do we know about fairies? The tricksters. The fairies probably got the girls to fake the photographs. When you think about it, it's a good story. One, they continue to hide themselves because fairies want us to believe that they don't exist, right? And secondly, the mystique of the fairies continues to exist, the fairy fate. But I've no doubt that the two girls went to their deathbed saying, yes, we faked the photographs, but there was fairies and the last picture was real. And that's good enough for me to make this an amazing story, because that last photograph, that, you know, that convinces me.
Same, that last photograph is different. It looks different. It feels different. It's otherworldly.
Yeah.
It's not something that two young girls playing around with a camera would have been able to do, you know, to get that effect, unless it's shown itself to them.
No, not with
And I believe it did.
the camera technology at the time, 1917. And also the girls have a very interesting expression in their face in all those photographs. There's almost like an ethereal, almost like spiritual look about them. I think those photographs were just so powerful that even people dismissed the article in the Strand, but when they saw those photographs, were like, wow, the pictures are so beautiful. The girls look so photogenic. They're so perfectly composed. It's remarkable that a girl is 16. I think Frances was the eldest, I think, or Elsie. Elsie was 16. That she had the natural artistic skill to set those photographs up the way they did. She was definitely a brilliant artist in her own right. But there's not a lot of information on what happened to them. They both left England, by the way, and went overseas between down in the 1980s when they died. But I'd be interested. It's a pity there's not more info on what people who spoke to them while they were away and things like that. But it's, to me, the Cottingley Fairies thing is told by the mainstream as if like Arthur Conan Doyle, the man who created Sherlock Holmes, Mr. Elementary, the guy who said that if it's, you know, science is the ultimate arbiter, fell for two girls with a cock and bull story. But we know they didn't. They were telling the truth.
Those photographs were beautiful, and they had such a natural look. The girls looked like fairies themselves almost, and they had that look that so many young women now try to emulate when they go to the fairy festivals. You know, when they do the dress up at those festivals that
Elfish,
they have.
almost, yeah.
Yeah, but it wasn't dress up, it wasn't cosplay, it was natural. It was absolutely beautiful.
And they had a very for their young age, a very deep look in their eyes. Like, there were very deep, soulful, intelligent eyes in those two children.
Yeah.
It's the thing, like, you know, yeah, they faked it. I mean, it isn't so much the paranormal like that, where you get a fake thing around something that's real. You know, you know, like we know there's something to UFOs. We know there's something to them, but yet people who believe do things like throw a hubcap from a Mercedes up in the air and take a photograph and say there's a flying saucer, and yet those people probably have seen real UFOs themselves, but they're desperate. And then again, this kind of plays in the idea that UFOs are from the same source as the fairies, the trickster thing. They get people to make fools of themselves. It's like, we reveal ourselves to you, now we're going to burlesque you by making you look like a fool. It's almost like that. It's almost like that's what they do to people.
Another way of looking at it is, if I saw a strange entity, or you saw a strange entity, and you couldn't get a photograph of it, but you wanted somebody else to see what you saw, you would draw it, wouldn't you? Or you would do some kind of collage and put something together and say, it looked like this. But just because it's not a natural photograph of the real thing, it doesn't mean it's fake. It's just a representation of what you've seen.
Yeah. And also, the thing that shows up in the last photograph, it looks nothing like the picture book cutouts they used for the earlier pictures. In fact, it's kind of spooky, actually. It's kind of creepy, you know, in that sense. But yeah, that's the thing that got me, is how energetically different the photograph even feels. Like, you really are looking at something very, very odd and out of the norm.
It has a similar look to that effect behind you on the background.
The aurora thing.
Yeah.
There's a simple. Here's the thing. I'm glad you brought that up, right? Last week, I put this aurora effect behind me just because I don't know. I just picked the other background. I couldn't find a photograph. You know, of the man, the statue of the London of the Boa Island megalith that I usually use.
Mm-hmm.
Well, last night, Ireland had its greatest ever aurora display in the history of the country. So it was almost like I was my own kind of like foreshadowing thing was going on there, because I'm not particularly obsessed with auroras, and as nice as this is, I just picked it casually, but it's just so bizarre. I know we're going off topic here, hey, but that's the nature of these 14 things, folks. That Ireland then has its greatest ever aurora. It's mad, isn't it? It's like you know, things happen when you start dealing, and we've been having this stuff too. We've been talking about this. Things have happened, synchronicities that have happened with us since we started doing this show. When you dive into this world sincerely, the veil around you and things start to give you hints back. Like that was one for me. I'm sure, I know you've had a few already. And topics we may research or think, or themes in films even that we talk about, start showing up, will show up a few days later.
It's true, yeah. Or tapping into, I might send you something or put something on a post, and you say, "I've just got this in my hand at the moment." The
Or it
Fortean
comes up on my,
Times.
or it comes up on my wall on my newsfeed. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
The synchronicities are off the scale, but I treat them as a cosmic thumbs up or a green light to say
Oh yeah,
that
you're on the right path. And
you're on
who
the right
knows?
path.
Arthur Conan Doyle could have had tremendous synchronicities at the time of the Cottingley Fairies, that even with the photographs being cutouts and everything, he didn't care. There was other signs and foreshadows and portents and dreams even that said this is the real thing. That's another thing. Last night, people reported, loads of my friends and myself reported incredible dreams last night, incredible, wild, vivid dreams. And also the Schumann resonance. I know this is probably like we should be on the Fortean news flash, really. Cue Fortean news flash intro. Boom. Okay. A quick sideline from the Conan Doyle and Cottingley Fairies. Ireland had its most fantastic aurora display ever yesterday, and also the Schumann resonance is off the scale. Something is happening. Something is happening in reality, and something is causing synchronicities, downloadings, all kinds of resolutions in the dream world with this world, and it may have something to do with this collapse in the wave function, but there's something happening right now, and that's the end of that news flash. Now back to the Cottingley. I'll put the thing right. So there you go. Sorry for that interruption, Sarah. I had to put that in there because it came up. But yes, this story, there was a film made of it, which I haven't seen. Have you seen the movie?
No, I haven't. No, but I am going to give that a watch now because it's piqued my interest.
Yeah. Conan Doyle was also on a sideline to this. He was once very close friends with Harry Houdini. And he fell out with him because Harry Houdini had exposed so many mediums as frauds. And though Houdini never said that all mediums are frauds, he said he'd never found a legit one. And Conan Doyle felt, well, Harry, you're just like making it all look bad. You know, you have this kind of a zealotry to kind of expose them all. But Houdini, that's not Conan Doyle's a fascinating character and is interested in mediumship and spiritualism. But the paradox of it, the same guy who Elementary, My Dear Watson, and this kind of thing, and made many statements about the sanctity of science in terms of devising things and logic, believed in fairies. Maybe we need more of that today, that kind of like polyglot sort of like natural philosophy, where you can believe the spirit science that we spoke about last week.
Yeah, or maybe he was bringing characters into his stories that were based on the science types that he knew,
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.
But it is good to have a foot in this world and a foot in the Fortean world, and be able to move freely between the two, the spiritual world.
Absolutely.
It's balance. It's a good balance. Just that, in my opinion, the Cottingley Fairies, that 5th photograph was real, and fairies exist.
Yeah, I agree. They did see the fairies. The two girls were brilliant artists, and the 5th photograph absolutely proves it. And that's what makes it such an incredible Fortean story, and the fact that it lasted so long, that they were rediscovered again in the 60s, and they were still saying they saw fairies. And then on their deathbeds in the 80s, they said, no, we faked the photographs, which goes to show you how deep in their hearts they held that belief in fairies. It was almost like they felt like they were that they would betray the fairies if they admitted they were fakes. And that's a remarkable turn of the screw when you think about it. Okay, that part of the show where we find out if we need a refreshing spin cycle to our consciousness to see if that we are harmoniously in touch with reality from our consciousness, and if not, what we can do about it. And this is Sara with the psychic hygiene.
It's a nice, simple psychic hygiene tip this week. Enjoying sleep. Enjoying sleep is the first step to proper psychic hygiene. Not only can it make you feel happier, it can also improve your psychic abilities. A proper night's sleep will shift you out of just surviving and into thriving mode. Following a nightly routine can determine how easily you'll be able to fall asleep and get a good night's rest. So keep your routine consistent and try following the same steps each night, as this programs your brain to realizing that it's almost time for winding down. And allow 30 minutes or so for winding down. And during that time, do whatever puts you in a state of calm, such as soft music, reading, relaxation exercises, things like that. Try to keep away from bright lights, as they can stop the production of melatonin, which is a hormone that the body creates to help you sleep. Give yourself 30 to 60 minutes before bed that's device-free. Devices cause mental stimulation that's hard to shut off, and they also generate a blue light, which decreases the melatonin production. And once you switch off the device, it can take up to 30 minutes for your brain to realise that it's actually nighttime and for the body to start producing melatonin for you to get to sleep. From a psychic perspective, lack of sleep is a big way we block our power, creativity, and intuition. Sleep is when the body has a chance to repair itself and strengthen the immune system. When you can't do this, not only do you feel ill, but you also feel blocked and stagnant, and your energy field is weakened, leaving you open to making poor decisions, mistakes, and being unable to concentrate, which can be quite dangerous. When we're energized, we're more inspired, more creative, and more productive, and we're more receptive instead of reactive to what is thrown at us during the day. We become a much better vessel for working with the energetic flow around us when we are well rested. And that's my psychic hygiene suggestion for this week.
Yes, that's very good about the melatonin thing and the effect of bright lights. I often find that tonight I will have trouble because I have an LED light shining on me here, and I find the LED lights really mess up my melatonin levels, because you said like your body doesn't know when it's going to sleep. The thing is with sleep, you go bonkers if you don't have it after a while. I mean, for years I worked night shifts because the most money was in it, and it nearly killed me. I know some people can do it, but it nearly killed me. And it's not. It's you know it's we're a biological clock. In the old days, our ancestors went to bed when it got dark and woke up when it got light. We can't live like that now because of the way modern society is structured. Well, yeah, that's a very good one. Sleep. So that's interesting, because my psychic hygiene later, my psychic weather later will have a similar theme.
Another synchronicity, eh?
Yeah.
And with regards to sleep deprivation is actually a torture method, or it used to be used, and it can actually send you insane.
Oh yeah, when I was researching back in the old days, when I was researching for my books on psychopaths, people who were often in relationships with psychopaths, the psychopaths kept them awake all night. Well, let's watch this movie. Let's do this. Let's go there. Let's go out to get some ice cream. Let's do this. 24-hour place. They would use sleep deprivation to actually break down their ability to protect themselves.
Wow, that's crafty.
Because you're less shrewd. You're less observant when you're knackered all the time.
Yeah, you make rash decisions, don't you? You're not thinking. You're not firing on all four cylinders, and yeah. I mean, it's dangerous as well if you're driving on empty.
Yeah, and also you're not dreaming, and if you don't dream, you go psychotic.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is Caxton Hall in London, situated very close to Westminster and the Houses of Parliament. In October and November 1910, Aleister Crowley brought his occult organisation into the public eye, where he performed the rites of Elusive, which was a series of 7 public invocation or rites written by Crowley himself, all based upon the 7 classical planets of ancient antiquity. Along with Aleister Crowley, the performance also featured Leila Waddell, known as Layla, and Victor Neuburg. The British press, on the other hand, had a different attitude, claiming that the entire thing was blasphemous and based on eroticism. Accompanied by the music, Layla Waddell, the rites of Luna or the Moon were danced by Joan Hayes, who was the lover of Victor Neuburg. Caxton Hall itself has a foreboding atmosphere about it. There's something in the building that contains the rites of Elusive, and by being present at the location, the sensitive observer can feel it too. The building has a foreboding energy, a large, brooding brick and stone edifice, and sits perfectly within the central magical heart of the great city of London. Crowley could not have picked a more fitting place to perform his work of religious ecstasy. This is Thomas Sheridan, reporting from Caxton Hall in London for Hocus Focus. Well, tonight's third and final story revolves around an event that's been happening since 1971 in a town called Bélmez in Andalusia in Spain, in a house belonging to a family called the Camaras. Since 1971, when it first happened, human faces allegedly started appearing in the floor of the house. When they attempted to wash them down, the faces appeared again. When they attempted to put a new screed of cement on the floor, the faces appeared again. It set off quite a thing in the town of Bélmez, where locals and also visitors were fascinated by these faces in the floor. All kinds of stories suggested that they were probably thought forms of people who once lived in that house, projected into the cement, Others said it was people who had been buried or massacred under the floor, trying to tell people that they were buried under there. What makes the story very interesting is not only the longevity, is that the attacks upon the family are quite unbelievable. Literally, the Spanish state, the local regional government, and every skeptic in Spain and abroad under the sun has painted the Camara family as frauds. But the amazing thing is they haven't really proved anything. They did the usual thing of saying that those things had been painted on the floor for the family for financial gain, which I find it kind of weird how you make money from that. And also that there's also numerous chemical analyses of the floor done over the years. And all the skeptics do is point to certain chemicals involved. But these chemicals would appear in things like cleaning agents when you were cleaning a floor. They would appear in the cement. They were not indicative of any proof that these things were painted. The faces are strange looking. They look amateurish, but that actually, thought form pictures do tend to look amateurish. They don't look like, Mona Lisa or something like that. They tend to look like this. This went on until the last of the family members mainly involved in the floor paintings, or allegedly in the story, died. And immediately the skeptics said, that's the end of that. We'll never hear about that ever again. Incredibly, in 2007, the faces in the floor started appearing again, after the people who they'd spent years accusing of painting them had died. Then what was really amazing was how nasty and vicious the local authorities got, and even Spanish TV went to war against them, claiming that the son had then started painting the same faces that his parents had been painting on the floor for financial gain. Yet absolutely no evidence was brought forward. This is one of these stories that I don't know if the faces are real or not. It was a very creepy story when I first found out about it. But it was one of these stories that it's almost like, my lady protests too much kind of thing. That the way the Spanish authorities and the skeptics literally went to war with this family, and at the end of the day proved nothing. They were incredibly arrogant when the elder members of the family died and said there'd be no more paintings. And when the paintings appeared again, it was almost like a vendetta against the family. Now, this was, and this went to like government level and everything. It was really bizarre. And why this reaction? If it was just a couple of, scammers painting pictures on the floor, they would have just ignored it and let it go. But there was almost like a visceral, practically hysterical terror to go after this family. This is what the story is as much about the way the family were taken down, as much as the actual phenomena of these strange faces themselves appearing on the floors. But some of the analyses the tests that they run are some of the most ridiculous things you've ever seen. The skeptics will go in and say, we found X amount of lead, X amount of, aluminium, and X amount of this. That proves they've been painted. What? It didn't prove anything. And, it proved nothing. And then they'd all finish off by saying, oh, they faked them, and they'd leave. And this is going on to this day. So this is one of the longest running Fortean phenomena involving a house and people living in it. And these pictures, we'll see them on the screen, they're quite spooky and quite strange. The Faces of Bélmez is just one of those stories that just blows my mind, but it's also one we learn an awful lot from. It seems to be tonight's show seems to be falling into the synchronicity of skeptics and, what it takes to actually make you believe something is real. So how do you feel about that, Sarah?
Well, to start with, paranormal phenomenon in private residential houses is one of my favourite subjects to read about, especially growing up in a house like that. So it always piques my interest, especially the ones during the 70s, because there's just something about that time that's really poignant in regards to that kind of stuff. I don't know what it is. It just feels, I like it. And the first thing to look at with this type of thing usually is the history of the building or the land that it's built on. And there was a professor called de Argumosa, who travelled to Bélmez after hearing about the case. And he said that through his research, he'd found several historic documents reporting that a 17th century governor of Granada, who was born in Bélmez, had murdered 5 members of a local family. And the whereabouts of the murder site were believed to have taken place either close to the house or in the house. And another theory was that it was because the house was close to a church, that it may have been built on the site of an old cemetery. And when the floor was removed and excavated, there were actually human remains several feet below the ground. But they were also found under other neighbouring houses, although it was only their house that was reporting these apparitions on the floor. But that could have been down to the sensitivity of the Lady Maria, who was a spirit medium. So she was obviously a very sensitive person. And we can manipulate energy with our minds using meditation and healing and positive thoughts and even psychic attacks and things like that, which are mostly unseen to the physical eye. But with very sensitive people, it can be done with the physical manifestations such as poltergeist activity or table tipping and spirit manifestations. So I believe it's possible that the images appear via Maria through some sort of psychokinetic means, and the faces actually would become less distinct when Maria wasn't feeling well.
Yeah.
And that would make sense because her electromagnetic field would be low and her energy would be depleted. But when she was back on form, the images would appear more distinct and sharper again. But it doesn't explain why the faces continued to appear after she passed away. And I had to think about that. And it could be that since it was, this whole thing has been given so much attention, and attention is effectively giving energy to something, that the faces have now been brought into manifest permanently as a psychic imprint on the atmosphere in that house or on that land, especially through the photography or psychic photography, as it's also known. Which is literally the ability to burn images from your mind onto a surface, such as photographic paper, by parapsychic means. Not to be confused with spirit photography, though, which is just taking photographs of spirits and fairies, like what we talked about earlier. So I think it was Maria doing something with some kind of psychotelekinetic means. Just like a young child can bring about poltergeist activity and not realise they're doing it, and eventually as they grow older it goes away, just like when Maria wasn't feeling well.
That's what was one of the things that moved me away towards seeing this as legit, was how the pictures would fade or deepen according to Maria. I find that, to me, is the most plausible aspect of the whole thing, because anyone could paint pictures on the floor, but the fact that they would actually fade and come back according to Maria's psychic state tells me that this was a legitimate thing, coupled with the fact that the actual, the skeptics and the government went to war against it. Almost like they had ancestors of the local government who were responsible for those murders or something. You get that impression.
There was a cover up there for what was below the house, you mean?
I'm just throwing that out there, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, but somebody didn't like it, did they?
Yeah, and that's that it just seemed, why was the government so interested in the paranormal thing? I find that so bizarre, and so dark. So they basically, when these people died, they did a TV special in Spain and basically calling them the frauds of the century and stuff. It really was quite dark how they attacked them. And again, if you look around online for information on how they actually debunked them, they didn't debunk them at all. They just used fancy scientific terms to say this, that, and the other, but they didn't debunk the faces as being frauds or fake.
That's the thing with a lot of skeptics, isn't it? They like to tell people who genuinely see these things how they actually saw something, and they weren't even there in the first place to witness it, but they're telling you that you didn't see what you saw, but they weren't even there.
Exactly, or hear what you heard, or experience what you experienced. The arrogance is astounding. You know, they walk up, they talk to people like they're children, adults like they're children.
Yeah.
Is there any other case you can think of something that's similar to the Bélmez faces, like Bélmez faces? Like I've heard stories in seances that they used to put talcum powder or flour on the floor, and footsteps would appear walking across them, or sometimes even people's faces pushed up against them. But I wasn't aware of anything else like that.
I've heard about the talcum powder. They would put that down, or in a haunted house, they put it down. So overnight, they could have a look if it had been disturbed, and sometimes they'd see footsteps or fingerprints or symbols or writing.
Yeah.
I've never done it. I've never tried that.
Well, I know someone who did it and saw a slither, and it was a slither of a snake on the floor. And this is in Ireland where there's no snakes. Isn't that creepy? That they, you know, you ever see a snake walking through the desert and makes an S shape, recurrent S. It was the distinct recurrent S of a serpent on the floor of the house in a country that has no snakes. And I found that one very, very creepy.
Is that not bordering on demonic?
I don't know. I mean, it's just like a snake. Why is there? You know, yeah, possibly. But that's what I just was like, wow, that's a weird one. But I didn't think too deeply into it, other than it was a very strange paranormal thing. It's interesting how this story, the Bélmez, the Bélmez faces and the Cottingley fairies, are both. So, and we just picked these randomly. We didn't even think about it. They're both paranormal, Fortean topics, where the element of painting is strong in them. You know, it's just a funny thing in different ways. But the people in Bélmez who see are absolutely convinced they're real. The neighborhood, and the locals. So it could also have been pissed off the local church. You know, they don't want people looking at things that isn't a Marian shrine or something like that.
I always feel for people that have these experiences and then they go public with it and they get ridiculed. I think there's nothing worse, and I always have a bit of compassion for them.
They're treated like criminals.
Yeah, it's not right, especially when you know yourself, if you've experienced something, it's shocking enough at the time, and it can be quite traumatizing. And then when you decide you're going to speak about it, to be treated like there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, like
it's horrible.
The Lutz family in Amityville, they were totally taken apart by the media. And then Long Island newspaper sets a camera up overnight and photographs the little DeFeo boy looking outside this, you know, the ghost of the DeFeo boy as clear as day at 3 a.m. looking around the door. So they were telling the truth all along. But, you know, did the newspaper say sorry? Nah.
No.
It's just an interesting phenomenon, an interesting anomaly, they call it.
I think this is why I keep my experiences and things just among like-minded people and Fortean circles. It's not something I would want to go full on public.
Oh, even when skeptics approach me, I say I'm not talking about it with you.
Yeah.
They say, well, that's because you don't believe it. I said, no, I do believe it. I'm just talking to you about it. I'm not going to waste my time. It's you know, it's just I'm not here to talk about it. No disrespect, but I'm not interested.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's an open-ended thing. They're luring you into a trap because they're going to try and make an idiot out of you.
Yeah, well,
or make you into a liar.
The false assumption, it's not a 50-50 encounter. It's not like we both have a theory, let's meet in the middle and see who's right and who's wrong. They come with the default assumption that you're full of shit and they're going to show the world how you're full of shit. And to me, that's a very aggressive, unethical mindset to approach the investigation of something. I'm here to kick your ass. That's literally how they think.
Yeah. That's society, isn't it? They've got they're so close-minded that if you can't see it, feel it, touch it, or smell it, it doesn't exist. And I think that's quite a sad way to go through life, really, missing out on a lot of things.
Yep, and that's their problem and not ours. But yeah, the faces of Bélmez is, if anybody has any theories on this kind of thing, I've heard of something similar, let us know, because that's this is one of these stories that I kind of like 90% maybe or 10% yes, but as the way Sara described it then, plus the fact that continued to happen after Maria died, makes me believe it's probably true. So that was the faces of Bélmez. Look that one up if you haven't heard it. Of course, you've already seen the pictures, and yeah.
Are we heading for smooth waters this week, or will we hit some turbulence? It's time to hold on to your hats as we go over to our very own psychic weather reporter, Thomas.
Well, the only hat you're going to need this week is your sleeping cap, because the psychic weather this week is about the dream oracle. The dream oracle is strong this week. This could be easily called the dream weather report. People are reporting on vivid dreams, which seem to be related to things like the increase in the Schumann resonance and the phenomenal aurora activity at both poles. And people are telling me they have dreams of dead relatives talking to them, very pleasant dreams, very intense, very strong, and very vivid. Now, dreams tell us all kinds of things. If you look at the Freudian aspect, they'll tell you that there's dealing with what they call diseases of the personality that have to be resolved, that you're being communicated on the inner world, where the Jungian form of psychology goes into a much deeper thing, that you're actually experiencing a sort of a transcendental, almost spiritual state. I tend to believe that dreams are a mixture of all those things. Sometimes they're telling us about a health problem we might have. Sometimes they're solving a problem. They're almost like the tarot in the nocturnal world. But a lot of times I do believe that dreams are another reality we enter into, that when we're asleep and we go into REM sleep, we actually are in another plane of existence, another world, the dreamland, the shadowland, whatever you want to call it. And this is why I'm always made a big deal about taking down and writing down your dreams, but not analyzing them the next morning. You do it over a long period of time. So that's the psychic weather this week. The dream oracle is flying. It's really strong. Become a somnonaut and dive into the world of dreams. And that's the psychic weather this week with me, Thomas.
Thank you, Thomas. And just to I actually had a dream. I've been dreaming about Ian Brown recently. I won't go into too much detail what the dream entailed, because I'm still trying to figure out the deeper meaning of it. But whatever it meant, I am very grateful to my subconscious for sending Ian Brown, because he's one of my favourite people.
Well, his music has something. I never really cared much for the Stone Roses, but I love his solo stuff, and his solo stuff does have a kind of an interesting kind of ethereal element to it. Like the songs are almost very strange and very haunting. I've seen him live and he's amazing. He's not the greatest singer in the world. My God, is he a bard in his own way. And his music does have that kind of dreamlike haunting quality a lot of the time, I think.
Yeah, his pen in his writing is just fantastic, and coming out in his songwriting, very, very creative, very original, and very spiritual as well, haunting.
Big time, yeah. And also he's one of our heroes, because he was the one major pop star, along with Van Morrison, who said, "Shove the needlecraft up your hole," and that the whole thing's a scam. And he'll forever be in my good books for that, just for having the balls to do that.
Yeah, if I had to put a music track to the last 3 years, it would be Ian Brown's music, because I just listened to it so much, because I let so much go over the last few years. He was one of those that I kept hold of. So
yeah, it's funny. I have a friend who was an okay fan of Van Morrison, because of Van Morrison stood up against the whole thing as well. Is become a huge Van Morrison fan. So the irony is that the people who stood up against it actually built a fan base, not and a more loyal one. That because they weren't fake celebrities. They actually meant their lyrics. They didn't actually. What we discovered through the last 3 years is that all the so-called rock and roll rebels and everything, they never meant it, except for one or two, Ian Brown, Van Morrison, and a few others. That was it.
Yeah, just a few people with integrity put the integrity over the industry.
Yeah, and they weren't
To
cowards.
be said. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yes, dreams. Dive into the world. There's something. There's messages. There's something in there for us right now. And get dreaming. And now we come to what's my favorite part of the show. Watching and not on the show if I was a viewer, and that's the 40 book guide, review, reprisal, inspiration, whatever you want to call it, where myself and Sara picked books that were huge 40 and 40-esque influences on us over the years. And it's my turn to go this week, and the book I've chosen is Tolkien, The Illustrated Encyclopedia by David Day. Now, this book is not only an encyclopedia of all the races, genealogies, and regions of the Middle Earth stories, but also contains a whole amount of phenomenal artwork. And it's all quite different. Some range from paintings, other are line drawings, other are kind of almost like collages. Others are basically like woodcut type prints or lino type prints like this one here. This book takes you to the places in Middle Earth. It transports your mind to them. It brings you to them. It's even though it's a straightforward, alphabetically arranged encyclopedia, you find yourself going to the barrows and encountering the barrow-waits, especially when they accompany pictures in it. It portrays the Lord of the Rings how I imagined it in my mind before the films were made. Kind of dark, kind of musty, kind of medieval almost, or Dark Ages, and it definitely gives that feel. But now there's two versions of this book. There's a small A5 version with a hardcover that looks kind of fancy. Don't get it. Get the large A4 version, because that's the only way you can really enjoy the artwork. So that's Tolkien. And also another thing about this book is you can see where a lot of Tolkien's inspirations came from mythology and also locations. You remember, Sara, a few weeks ago, we had the location report on the roaches in Staffordshire. You get a very strong sense of, you find yourself reading about, say, the barrows and say, where are they? Where would they have been located? I'm thinking of landscapes you may know personally that suits the descriptions of the landscapes within here. So that's Tolkien, The Illustrated Encyclopedia by David Day. A must-have for any Tolkien fan, and also a must-have for anyone interested in mythology and who likes to travel in their mind. I absolutely love this book. I just love to sit down sometimes and fall into its pages and travel through the landscapes and people of Middle Earth, and just randomly pick a page, and in your mind you see and feel things. So the book is definitely a labor of love.
Okay, my book this week is called Hauntings by Paul Rowland, and it's a collection of stories, magazine snippets, and accounts of hauntings, different types of hauntings throughout the world. And it's full of photographs. And can you see there? You won't be able to see because it's black and white, and then my background's black and white. What's that? Okay. And it's full of black and white photographs and to illustrate the stories that are in here. And it covers all types of hauntings from it covers what is a ghost, and it covers haunted cities around the world, angels and apparitions, people coming back from the dead for vengeance, haunted highways and motorways, haunted homes, possessions, poltergeists, and exorcisms. Everything's in here. And when you finish reading it, if you're anything like me, you'll come to the conclusion that ghosts are they're not a supernatural phenomenon, but they're a natural one. And they're either earthbound spirits or residual personal energy, which lingers at the location which was significant to the individual. And just to name a couple of the stories in here, there's a story about some owners of a modern dream house who took their spectral squatter to court. There's a story about a dead pilot who took the controls of a crippled aircraft that was about to crash. There's a story about some Ghostbusters who got more than they bargained for. And another one that stands out is a story of a murder victim who comes back from the dead to make sure that their killer is put behind bars. Absolutely brilliant book, good coffee table book. Just pick it up, open it up at any page or read it cover to cover. It never gets old, and it's coming very handy as well for these episodes, I have to say.
I love that cover.
Yeah. Lovely.
Who's the writer?
Paul Rowland.
Oh, yeah.
He's wrote a number of these types of books. His other books, which are similar, are The Complete Book of Ghosts and Investigating the Unexplained. So he's a true Fortean.
Fabulous.
Great book. Picked this up in a charity shop to actually. I don't know how much it would be new, but I picked it $9.99. It says new, but I picked it up for a couple of quid a long time ago.
Wonderful. Okay, that's tonight's show. Thanks very much, Sarah, for that. Again, I hope you had a great time. I hope you get a lot from the show, as we do. We always welcome the suggestions for topics, your insight on topics, and tell us what you would like to see added to the show, what you'd like to cover. If you like more ghostly stuff or cryptid stuff, you tell us. We'll definitely read them and take note of them. And thanks for sharing the show out there and getting more people to see it. And thanks to all the new people who've come along since. Next week's episode will be on Sarah's channel, Sara Mondaini. And before we go, well, I'll let Sarah say goodbye, and then she's going to introduce a little special bonus at the end.
Yeah, thanks to everybody for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you next week, because next week is episode 10. So we've hit double figures, and it only seems like last week when we started this. It's just flown by. Absolutely flown by. So it's been brilliant. So here's to many more to come. Right, so I got a little surprise for you. With regards to last week's episode when we talked about the tarot, I thought we do the psychic weather for the week. So why don't we do a tarot card and do a little tarot reading for the week coming up? And I'll pick the card and I'll give my interpretation of it, and Thomas can give his, and then you can take it away and you can have a think about it for the week and just be aware of the energy that might be around. Okay, so this week's tarot card of the week, the Ace of Swords. The Ace of Swords shows a hand appearing from a white cloud, which is representative of the divine, and holds an upright sword. And swords are symbolic of the mind and the intellect. And at the tip of the sword sits a crown draped with a wreath, which is a sign of success and victory. So this is a card of clarity, truth, new ideas and opportunities. And it presents the moment when you can see the world from a whole new perspective. You're seeing through the deception of the old world and preparing for a journey into the new world. So use this time to mentally sort out what is coming with you and what's to be left behind. It's a time to become laser focused on your goals, because aces in the tarot are always a big thumbs up, as well as indicators of new opportunities and new beginnings. So don't be afraid to go for it. However, remember that the ace signifies the beginning of a new opportunity, and it won't happen overnight, but you will know that it's in the air. And the hills at the back of the card are reminding you that the new road might be a bit bumpy with a few challenges, but keep a positive mindset and don't let people drag you back. And the card can also symbolize a time to let go of the old belief systems that no longer serve you anymore. And you might be starting to realize now there's a new spiritual truth, or you may be embracing some new spiritual ideas and attitudes. So look out for flashes of mental clarity and clear thinking. You may see more stimulating people coming in, more stimulating conversations that are more on your level, and you might find the small talk and awkwardness starts to fall away now. And you'll find that you can argue your point with truth and integrity as opposed to being afraid to speak your mind. So keep your eyes and ears open for new opportunities, new stimulating conversation and people.
The Ace of Swords also represents the cold Nordic regions of the world, the Arctic regions in particular. And the garland is often symbolic of the aurora. So the tremendously synchronistic card there. During the lockdowns, the sword I identified very strongly with the cold sword of the north of Odin, striking down the wild hunt and so on. So it is this card of the Arctic regions. So it's perfect for right now. You couldn't have picked a more synchronistic card. And I agree with everything you say. Yeah, the cold sword of the north takes no prisoners. So remember, you're being given, the path is being cut through for you. Follow accordingly. And thank you for that, Sarah. Good night, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Good night.